He woke up on the kitchen floor, his belly stretched like a drum, his breath shallow, eyes fixed on the ceiling, wondering if this was the last time he'd ever see anything at all. But the worst part wasn't the rotting liver. It was the fact that his only daughter, the one he never apologized to, was standing just 5 meters away, and he didn't even recognize her. Have you ever heard a story that's both heartbreaking and redemptive? Hit that subscribe button, because the truth will haunt you deeper than any movie ever could. Henry Moore had never been a man of routine, but lately, every morning felt the same. He'd wake up with a dull pressure sitting heavy in his lower belly, like he'd swallowed a rock that never quite settled. At first, he thought it was gas, then maybe constipation, then indigestion. After all, he was 62, lived alone, and had long since stopped eating like someone who cared about nutrition. But when his belt refused to close for the 3rd morning in a row, and when tying his shoes required a groan and a slow descent like a man, it was a humid Monday in New Orleans, the kind of thick, sticky heat that wrapped around your skin like a damp towel. Henry sat on his porch with a mug of weak coffee, staring out at the cracked sidewalk and the rusted bike leaning against the fence. His belly pressed tight against his worn flannel shirt, buttons pulling slightly. He shifted in his seat, uncomfortable in a way that wasn't just physical. There was a weight to him now, more than just the swelling. Something inside felt off. He placed a trembling hand on his abdomen. It was firm, bloated, stretched unnaturally. But he hadn't gained weight anywhere else. His arms were still thin, his collarbone sharp as ever. It wasn't fat, he knew that much. And it wasn't food, because he hadn't eaten much in days. Every meal left him full after just a few bites. He hadn't been to a doctor in years. The last time was when his neighbor forced him to get a tetanus shot after he'd stepped on a nail in the garden. Since then, he figured if something really bad happened, he'd feel it. Pain was the body's way of raising the alarm, wasn't it? But pain never came, just the swelling, the tightness, the feeling like something was moving inside. That afternoon, Linda stopped by. She was 73, sharp-tongued, and had been a nurse for most of her life. She brought over a container of gumbo, but Henry barely touched it. She watched him closely, the way old nurses do, picking up clues from the way he held his stomach, the way he breathed. "You look like hell," she said, blunt as ever. "I feel like it," he admitted. "Been bloated for a few days now." She set the gumbo down and crossed her arms. "How long's your belly been like that?" He shrugged. "A few weeks maybe. Thought it was the beer belly catching up." "You haven't had a real drink in years, Henry." He didn't answer. Linda stepped closer and squatted, placing a firm hand on his midsection. "You mind if I press a little?" Henry winced but nodded. She tapped the skin gently, listening like it was a drum. Her expression darkened. "You ever heard of ascites?" she asked. "Of what?" "It's when your abdomen fills with fluid, usually a sign that something's wrong with your liver." She stood up, her knees cracking. "You need to see someone, Henry. Soon." Henry frowned. "It doesn't hurt, just uncomfortable. Livers don't always scream when they're in trouble. Sometimes they whisper, real quiet-like, until it's almost too late." She pulled a folded pamphlet from her purse and handed it to him. "Here, read this tonight, and promise me you'll call the clinic tomorrow." Henry took the paper without looking at it. "You're being dramatic. I'm being a nurse." After she left, he unfolded the pamphlet. The title read, 10 Silent Signs of Liver Trouble You Shouldn't Ignore. His eyes skimmed the list. And bloating, or abdominal swelling, a loss of appetite, and fatigue, infusion, jaundice and easy bruising and swelling in the legs, nausea, unexplained weight loss, itchy skin. He had at least 5, maybe 6. Maybe all of them, if he was being honest. He set the pamphlet down, rubbed his eyes, and leaned back in his chair. The creak of the wood sounded louder than usual. Was this it? Was this how it started? He thought back to all the nights he spent in bars, the whiskey on his breath as he stumbled home, the blurred memories of playing his saxophone while the crowd cheered and his liver quietly took the hits. He'd slowed down years ago, after Sarah left, after his wife packed up and vanished without a trace. But was it too late? He pressed his hand into his abdomen again. It was tight, round like a drum. His own body, foreign to him. That night, he didn't sleep. The pressure in his belly grew worse when he lay down, like it was pressing against his lungs. He sat up in bed, panting, staring into the dark. He remembered Linda's words. Sometimes they whisper, real quiet-like. And maybe this was it, the whisper. Henry hadn't stepped inside a medical clinic in over 15 years. The walls smelled of antiseptic and quiet desperation. Fluorescent lights flickered above as he sat in the waiting room, trying to look casual in a plastic chair that creaked beneath him every time he shifted his weight. The forms in his lap were half-filled, mostly because he didn't know what to write under primary care physician. He didn't have one. A mother rocked a coughing child beside him. An older man in a veteran's ball cap stared ahead at nothing. The air conditioning rattled overhead like an engine about to fail. Henry kept looking down at his stomach, now bulging visibly beneath his loose button-down shirt. He'd tried wearing an old denim jacket to cover it, but it only made him sweat more. It wasn't just bloating anymore, it was a presence. He remembered Linda's words again. Livers don't always scream. Sometimes they whisper. That whisper had become a growl. The nurse finally called his name. He rose slowly, nodding to no one in particular, as he followed her past the reception desk and into the exam room. She took his vitals with minimal conversation. Blood pressure high, pulse a little rapid. Then she told him the doctor would be in soon. 10 minutes later, the door opened to reveal a petite woman in her early 30s with a clipboard and a serious expression. She had a quiet confidence about her, the kind you didn't expect in someone so young. Her white coat bore a name tag that read, Dr. Elena Navarro, Internal Medicine, Resident. Mr. Moore, she said, offering a hand. I'm Dr. Navarro. I'll be seeing you today. Henry shook her hand reluctantly. You look like you just finished high school. She smiled politely, used to the jab, almost 2 decades ago actually. Let's get started, shall we? She reviewed his vitals, then gently asked about his symptoms. Henry recounted everything. The bloating, the loss of appetite, the shortness of breath. He didn't mention Linda or the pamphlet. She didn't need prompting, though. Have you noticed swelling in your ankles or legs, she asked. He nodded. Some. Thought it was just age. How's your appetite? Gone, he said more bitterly than he intended. Food tastes like cardboard. Any alcohol use? Henry hesitated. I used to drink. A lot. I quit. Sort of. Cut back a lot anyway. She made a note without judgment. How long ago? About 10 years ago, he lied. It was closer to 4. She tapped her pen against the clipboard. I'd like to do a physical exam and an abdominal ultrasound today. Is that okay? Do I have a choice? You always have a choice, Mr. Moore. But if it were me, I'd want to know what's happening in there. He lay back on the exam table while she rolled in the ultrasound machine. As she moved the wand across his distended abdomen, the monitor lit up in swirling shades of gray and black. Henry tried not to look, but it was impossible to ignore the way her brow furrowed. She pressed gently, then more firmly, angling the probe under his ribs. Take a deep breath for me. He did, and the image shifted. She froze the frame and studied it. There's fluid, she said finally. Quite a bit, actually. What kind of fluid? He asked, heart rate suddenly spiking. It's called acidic fluid. It's free-floating fluid in your abdominal cavity, and it's not supposed to be there. What causes that? There are a few possible reasons, but the most common, especially with your history, is liver disease. He sat up slowly, his breath shallow. Are you saying I have cancer? Not necessarily, but it does suggest that your liver isn't functioning properly. One of the liver's roles is to regulate the pressure in the blood vessels around the abdomen. When it stops working correctly, fluid leaks into the belly. She paused, letting that settle in. Think of it like a dam cracking. The pressure builds up in the wrong places, and the water, well, in this case, the fluid, escapes. Henry stared at the floor. I thought I was just getting fat. You're not fat, Mr. Moore. In fact, you're losing muscle mass, which often happens when the liver starts to fail. The word fail echoed like a gunshot in his mind. So what now? He asked. I want to run some blood tests. Liver enzymes, albumin levels, clotting factors. They'll give us a better picture of how far along this is. And I'll recommend a paracentesis. What's that? It's a procedure to remove some of the fluid from your abdomen using a needle. It'll help you feel more comfortable, and we can send the fluid to the lab for analysis. Henry looked down at his belly. You gonna drain me like a balloon? She smiled gently. Only a little at first, just enough to ease the pressure. If we take too much too fast, it could cause other problems. He exhaled shakily. So this is bad. It's serious, she said, but not hopeless. Depending on your results, we may be able to slow it down, maybe even reverse some of the damage. And if I don't do anything, then the fluid will continue to build. You'll become more uncomfortable. Eventually, it could lead to infection, kidney failure, or even death. There it was, the truth, served without sugar. She handed him a pamphlet, this one from the clinic, titled Understanding Ascites and Liver Health. He glanced at the bold text on the front. Your liver may be silent, but it never forgets. He looked up. "You ever see someone get better from this?" She nodded. "Yes, but only when they catch it early and take it seriously. And me? That depends on what you do next." He didn't say anything for a while. Dr. Navarro stood and started organizing her files. "I'll have the nurse come in for the blood draw. We'll schedule a paracentesis for tomorrow." As she opened the door, she added, "You made the right choice coming in today, Mr. Moore. A lot of people don't." And then she was gone, leaving Henry alone on the exam table, the paper crinkling beneath him. He stared down at his belly again, round and tight like a balloon ready to pop. For the first time in weeks, it wasn't the weight of his body that he felt most. It was the weight of what he didn't know until now. The sunlight outside the clinic felt too bright, too sharp, like it was trying to expose something he'd spent years hiding. Henry stepped onto the cracked sidewalk, one hand on his stomach, the other shielding his eyes. The city moved around him, indifferent. Cars passed. Horns honked. Somewhere someone was playing jazz on a street corner. Life continued, but something in him had stopped. The pamphlet Dr. Navarro had handed him was still folded in his pocket. He hadn't read it. He didn't need to. Not yet. The words had already carved themselves into his mind: liver failure, fluid buildup, risk of death. He took the long way home, wandering through side streets, past shuttered bars and crumbling brick walls painted with fading murals of saxophonists and saints. The familiar scent of stale beer and cigarette ash hung in the air, ghosts of a time he couldn't escape. His feet led him back to Bourbon Street, though he didn't realize it until he was standing outside his old haunt, the Morini Tap. It was closed now, boarded up, windows dusty, graffiti scrawled across the once proud name, but Henry could still see it as it had been. The lights, the smoke, the roar of laughter, and the soft moan of his saxophone echoing through the midnight haze. He leaned against the wall, letting the memories come. Back then he'd been a firework, bright, loud, and destined to burn out fast. Every night he stood on the tiny stage, eyes half closed, lost in the music. The saxophone wasn't just an instrument. It was his voice, his confessional booth, his escape hatch. And after the final set, there was always the bottle. Whiskey, mostly. Cheap, sharp, fast. He liked the way it made him forget. Forget the bills, forget the fights, forget the daughter who watched him stumble in the door with wide, frightened eyes. Caroline had warned him, over and over. "You're not just killing yourself, Henry. You're killing this family." But he never listened. He'd apologize in the morning, make promises, bring home flowers. Then the next night, the cycle would spin again. Sarah was 5 when she stopped running to the door to greet him. She was 7 when she stopped speaking to him altogether. By the time she was 10, she was more a roommate than a daughter, quiet, watchful, already growing the armor she'd need to protect herself from him. And then there was that night, the night everything cracked wide open. It had started like any other, a late gig, too many drinks, a shouting match with Caroline over the phone. He remembered slamming the door on his way out, keys jangling in his pocket, anger and liquor fueling every step. The rain had been relentless that night, turning the roads slick and the world into a blur. He shouldn't have been behind the wheel. He knew that, but knowing hadn't stopped him before, and it didn't stop him then. He saw the figure too late, a man crossing the street near the corner of Elysian Fields. There was a flash of movement, a thud, a horrible cracking sound, and then silence. Henry had slammed the brakes. Stumbled out. The man was lying motionless in the rain, blood mixing with the water on the pavement. People were yelling. Someone called 911. Henry didn't run, but he didn't stay long either. By the time the police arrived, he was sitting on the curb, head in his hands, breath reeking of whiskey. But no charges were filed. The toxicology report was inconclusive. Witnesses disagreed. The victim had been jaywalking. There was reasonable doubt, they said. Caroline didn't need a courtroom to pass judgment. She packed her things the next morning and left without a word. Sarah never looked back. Now, decades later, the memory was still a fresh wound beneath the scar tissue. Henry blinked against the sunlight, pulled himself away from the wall, and walked the rest of the way home. His house felt smaller than usual. The living room was cluttered with relics of the past, a broken metronome, old vinyl records, photographs of a life half-lived. He sat on the couch, reached under the coffee table, and pulled out a half-empty bottle of bourbon. Dust clung to the glass. He stared at it for a long time. This had always been his answer, his comfort, his courage, his poison. But now, it just looked like a weapon. He unscrewed the cap and brought it to his lips. The scent hit him like a fist, sharp, acrid, familiar. He paused, closed his eyes. This wasn't just about him anymore. Not if his liver was dying. Not if he was walking toward a slow, silent collapse. He lowered the bottle, set it gently on the table. For the first time in years, he didn't take the drink. Instead, he leaned back, pressed a hand against the swell of his stomach, and whispered to the empty room, "I'm sorry." He didn't know who he was talking to. Caroline, Sarah, the man in the rain, maybe all of them, maybe himself. The hospital room was colder than Henry expected, not in temperature, but in spirit. Pale walls, stainless steel fixtures, a bed covered in white paper that crinkled under his every move. He sat stiffly on the edge, wearing a thin gown that barely reached his knees, one arm folded across his belly like he was trying to hold himself together. A nurse knocked once, then entered. She was tall, middle-aged, with calm eyes, and a voice that settled over the room like a warm blanket. Her name tag read Tanya. Her hands moved efficiently as she prepared the tray of instruments, sterile gloves, antiseptic wipes, gauze pads, syringes, a long needle, and several vials. It all looked like too much, too serious. "We'll be draining some of the fluid today, Mr. Moore," she said, her tone gentle. "It'll relieve the pressure and help you breathe easier. The doctor will be in shortly." He nodded without speaking. She looked at him a moment longer, then reached for a marker and made a small dot on the side of his abdomen. "This is where they'll insert the needle. It might sting a little, but you'll feel better after." Henry let out a long breath. "How much are you taking out?" "Depends. Could be a few liters. Don't worry, we'll go slow." He laughed weakly. "Liters? Sounds like I'm carrying a fish tank in there." "You'd be surprised," Tanya said with a kind smile. "Some folks walk in here with 10 liters and don't even know it." Henry didn't respond. He looked away, eyes fixed on the blinds swaying gently in the AC breeze. Outside, sunlight flickered through the slats like an old film reel. A part of him wanted to run. The bigger part, the heavier part, knew he couldn't. Dr. Navarro entered a few minutes later, dressed in scrubs, her hair pulled back tight. She greeted him, then turned her attention to the prep tray. Tanya handed her gloves without a word. "Still with us, Mr. Moore?" Elena asked, voice steady. "I haven't left yet." "Good. Let's get started." They positioned him on the bed, tilted slightly to his side. Tanya offered him her hand when the antiseptic touched his skin, cold, sharp, like a warning. He squeezed it, not hard, just enough to feel something human. The needle slid in after a quick pinch. At first, there was just pressure, then warmth, then nothing. The sensation of draining was subtle but undeniable. He could feel it in his ribs, in his breath, in the loosening of everything inside him. A container slowly filled with amber fluid beside him, almost like apple juice, he thought grimly. "Fluid looks clear," Dr. Navarro said to Tanya. "That's a good sign. How long will this keep me comfortable?" Henry asked. "A few days, maybe a week. We'll start you on diuretics and sodium restriction, but if the liver doesn't improve, the fluid will keep coming back." "How do I make it improve?" Dr. Navarro hesitated. "Depends on the damage. We'll know more once your lab results are in. But you'll need to stay away from alcohol, watch your salt, keep your weight stable, and follow up regularly." Tanya changed the container as the fluid continued to drain. Henry turned his head away. It felt surreal, like watching someone siphon the past out of him. The room was quiet except for the soft drip, drip, drip. "You're doing well," Tanya said softly. "Most people tense up. You're calm." He swallowed. "I think I'm just tired." When the procedure ended, the equipment was cleared quickly. Henry felt lighter, but weak, hollowed out. His stomach looked deflated, almost sunken. The gown clung to his now loose skin. Tanya returned with warm towels and helped him sit up slowly. He hated needing help, hated how slow he'd become. "Can I?" he began, struggling to ask. She understood before he finished. "I've got you." She helped him clean up, gentle and quiet, never making it feel like pity. Still, Henry flushed with embarrassment. He felt like a man undone, drained in more ways than one. "I used to play music, you know," he said suddenly, needing to fill the silence. Tanya smiled. "Saxophone, right? You have that look. That obvious?" She chuckled. "My dad was a jazzman, played trumpet until his lungs gave out, said music kept him alive longer than medicine ever could." Henry let the silence return. Tanya adjusted his gown, smoothed the blanket over his legs. "Does this get better?" he asked. Tanya's face softened. "Sometimes, if people listen to their bodies, if they catch it early." "What about me?" She tilted her head. "You showed up, didn't you? That's more than most." She stood, gathering the towels, and paused before leaving. "Mr. Moore," she said gently, "don't think of this as the end. Think of it as a reset, a reset. Your body's telling you something. It's giving you a second chance. Most people don't get one. When she left, Henry lay back, staring at the ceiling. His belly was flatter now, but still felt foreign. He reached down, placed a hand over it. It wasn't just water they had drained. It was time, regret, memory, and maybe, just maybe, the start of something different. The next morning, Henry sat at the kitchen table with a cup of lukewarm coffee and a blank piece of paper. The pen in his hand felt heavier than it should have. He stared at the lines, the emptiness of them, the silence that came before the first word. The house was still, no television, no radio, only the faint hum of the refrigerator and the occasional groan of the old floorboard settling. Outside, the neighborhood was waking up, cars pulling out of driveways, a dog barking at a passing bike. But inside, everything felt paused. He looked down at his belly, now less distended but still tender. It wasn't just the fluid they'd drained, it was something deeper, something pulled out from within. He hadn't slept much the night before. Tanya's words had stayed with him. Don't think of this as the end. Think of it as a reset. But a reset for what? What did he have left to reset? He reached for the photo tucked into the corner of the mirror across the room. It was old, faded, the colors almost washed out. Sarah was maybe 6 in the picture, missing one front tooth and laughing with her whole body. She sat on his lap, both hands wrapped around the neck of a saxophone almost as tall as she was. He remembered that day. Summer, a backyard cookout, jazz playing on a battery-powered radio. Caroline had taken the photo just before the clouds rolled in. That had been a good day, one of the rare ones. Henry set the photo down beside the paper and finally began to write. Dear Sarah, I don't know where you are. I don't even know if you'll ever read this. But something in me says I need to write it anyway, because time doesn't wait, and silence doesn't heal unless we fill it with something true. I don't want anything from you. Not forgiveness, not understanding. I just want to say some things that have lived too long in the corners of my heart. You were always brighter than me, smarter, kinder. You saw through my noise, the music, the laughter, the show I put on for everyone else. Even when you were small, you could see I wasn't the man I wanted to be. And maybe that's what hurt the most, knowing that you knew. I don't remember every birthday I missed. I wish I could say I do, but I remember the look in your eyes when I forgot the one with the cake shaped like a saxophone. You had waited for me to come home, and I didn't. That night still wakes me up sometimes. I remember your voice when you were 5, whispering into my ear, "Play that sleepy song, Daddy." And I would, over and over, until your breathing matched the rhythm of the notes. I remember the way you used to reach for my hand when we crossed the street, and the day you stopped. There was a moment, before everything went sideways, when I thought I could fix it, when I thought cutting back on the drinking would be enough. But addiction is a liar, Sarah. It tells you you're in control while it's digging the hole beneath your feet. And then one night, I climbed into a car when I shouldn't have, and someone's father never came home. I wish I could tell you that I paid for that mistake, that the weight of it left some visible scar. But the truth is, I walked away. Legally, anyway. Inside, I never stopped carrying it. Every time I picked up the bottle again, it was partly to drown the sound of that man's body hitting the hood of my car. I never told you that. I didn't know how, maybe I still don't. But it's the truth, and it belongs to you, if you want it. These days, I move slower, my hands shake sometimes, my belly fills with water I didn't ask for. The doctors say my liver's been waving a white flag for years, and I just didn't notice. Or maybe I did, and I chose not to care, but I care now. Not because I'm afraid to die. I think I already started dying the day you stopped calling me Dad. I care because I want, for once, to be a man you could say wasn't all bad, even if it's just one line in the story you tell about me someday. If you remember anything about me, I hope it's not the shouting, not the broken promises, not the smell of whiskey in your hair when I hugged you goodnight. I hope you remember that one summer day when you held my saxophone with both hands and laughed like the world couldn't touch you. You looked up at me and said, "I want to play just like you." I didn't deserve that moment, but I've carried it like a treasure ever since. That's all. That's the whole reason for this letter, to give that memory back to you, because it was never mine to keep. Love, Henry. He folded the letter slowly, as if folding a piece of himself. He placed it in an envelope and wrote Sarah Moore on the front. No address, no city, just a name. He sat there for a while, staring at the envelope. Then he walked to the old box of keepsakes in the hallway closet and pulled out an address book from 20 years ago. The pages were yellowing, the ink fading, but on the third page under M, he found what he was looking for, Sarah, College Apt, Baton Rouge. It was a long shot. She hadn't lived there in decades, but maybe, just maybe, someone would forward it. Maybe fate, for once, would play nice. He sealed the envelope, added a stamp, and walked it to the corner mailbox. As the metal door slammed shut, he placed a hand on his chest, just over the slow rhythm of his heartbeat, and whispered, "Let her remember." The envelope arrived on a Wednesday, tucked between a credit card offer and a grocery coupon. Sarah almost didn't see it. There was no return address, no city, just her name in shaky, slanted handwriting, Henry's handwriting. She recognized it instantly, though it had been more than 20 years since she'd last seen it on a birthday card or school permission slip. She stared at the envelope for a long time, frozen in the doorway of her apartment. Her pulse quickened. She considered throwing it away, letting it sit unopened until it yellowed with time, but something in her hand refused to let go. Inside, she unfolded the letter. The pages trembled in her grasp, not from the paper but from the weight of the words. Each line pulled her deeper into a space she thought she'd sealed off forever. Her father's voice came back, not as it had been in anger or in drunken haze, but as something quieter, regretful, raw, human. She read the letter 3 times. When she was done, she folded it carefully, smoothing the creases as if trying to understand the man who had written it. Then she packed a small overnight bag, cleared her schedule, and booked the earliest train to New Orleans. The hospital looked the same as any other, glass, steel, and the smell of antiseptic and overcooked vegetables. She walked the halls like a ghost, her coat drawn tightly around her. She wasn't sure what she was doing. She wasn't even sure what she wanted. Closure? Revenge? Forgiveness? Maybe just one real look at the man who had shaped her and then disappeared from her life. She asked about a Henry Moore at the front desk. The nurse checked the system and gave her the room number without question. No one recognized her name. That was good. The room was dim. Henry lay in the hospital bed, half turned on his side, one hand resting on his chest. His face was thinner than she remembered, skin sagging slightly, gray stubble lining his jaw. But it was him. There was no mistaking that crooked nose, or the crease above his brow that had deepened over the years. He looked small now, breakable. Sarah stepped in without making a sound. She stood by the door, watching the slow rise and fall of his chest. His breathing was shallow but steady. Machines hummed quietly around him, their blinking lights painting soft shadows on the walls. For a long time she did nothing, just watched. Then, as if pulled by something beyond her will, she moved closer. She sat in the chair beside his bed, the same chair she'd sat in as a child when he'd practiced his saxophone. The same position, different time, different man. She didn't speak. Words felt dangerous, like they might crack open something too fragile to survive the air. She reached out slowly and touched his hand. It was warm, dry. She curled her fingers around his gently. Henry stirred. His eyelids fluttered, then opened. His eyes, still that same stormy blue, blinked against the light. He turned his head, and for a moment, they simply looked at each other. She didn't smile. He didn't speak. There was no recognition in his eyes. Not quite. But something flickered, confusion first, then curiosity, then softness. "Hello," he said hoarsely. "Hi," she replied, her voice steadier than she expected. "Are you with the hospital?" She nodded. "Just visiting." He looked down at their joined hands, then back at her face. "You remind me of someone." Her throat tightened. "Maybe I do." He didn't press. He just closed his eyes for a moment, letting the silence wrap around them like a blanket. Then he whispered, "You have kind hands." She didn't answer. She couldn't. She sat with him like that for nearly an hour, neither of them saying much. He drifted in and out of sleep. Each time he opened his eyes, she was still there. And though he didn't ask her name again, he never let go of her hand. At one point he said, "I wrote a letter." "I know," she replied. He nodded, as if that made sense. "I didn't think anyone would read it." "I did." "Good," he whispered. "That's good." Another silence. Then, more to himself than to her, he added, "Funny how some things take a lifetime to say." When he fell asleep again, Sarah stood. She looked down at him, studying the lines on his face, the fragile breath between his ribs. She traced the air above his forehead with her fingers, almost touching but stopping short. She walked to the door, then paused, looking back one last time. "I remember the song," she whispered. Then she was gone. The pain came suddenly, like a knife through his side. Henry was trying to reach for a glass of water when his knees buckled. He crumpled to the floor of his kitchen, clutching his abdomen, sweat pouring down his back. The room spun. His breathing turned shallow, jagged. Each inhale felt like trying to pull air through a closed door. The ambulance came within 15 minutes. In the ER, the monitors beeped wildly. His blood pressure was dropping. Fever spiked. A tense conversation swirled around him, terms he only half understood: peritonitis, spontaneous bacterial infection, decompensated cirrhosis. But one word stuck out clear as thunder: ICU. By the time he was wheeled into the sterile corridor of intensive care, Henry could barely keep his eyes open. Nurses worked in controlled urgency, inserting lines, drawing blood, hanging IV fluids. The fluorescent lights above blurred into glowing tunnels. His body, already hollowed by years of slow decline, now seemed to cave inward. He drifted in and out of consciousness. Each time he woke, there was a new machine, a new number flashing, a new pair of eyes watching. The infection had reached the fluid in his belly. It was common in patients like him, Dr. Navarro explained later. The acidic fluid, once a silent intruder, had become a breeding ground. Now his liver was failing to filter toxins. His kidneys were showing signs of distress. His time, once measured in years, was now measured in days, maybe hours. Sarah sat in the hallway just outside his room, staring at the linoleum floor, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. No one inside knew she was his daughter. She had given only her professional ID when asked, and no one questioned it. She preferred it that way. Until now. Through the glass panel, she watched Henry lie still under layers of wires and tubing. The man who had once carried her on his shoulders, who had destroyed everything good in her childhood, now looked more like a forgotten patient than a father. She had waited so long to face him, and now he was slipping away again. She didn't notice the man who had taken the bed beside Henry until the next morning. He was in his early 40s, tall and broad-shouldered, with a deep scar running across his jawline. His name was Stanley, according to the chart clipped to the foot of the bed. He was being treated for complications from untreated hepatitis C, another victim of liver disease, another life unraveling quietly. The two men barely exchanged words at first. Henry was too weak, and Stanley seemed more interested in the television mounted to the wall, always set on the news with the volume too low to hear. But on the second day, as Sarah stood near the doorway reading Henry's chart, she overheard Stanley talking to the nurse. "I grew up in Baton Rouge," he said. "Lost my dad when I was a kid. Car accident. Guy hit him in the rain, never served a damn day." Sarah's eyes froze on the clipboard. She turned slowly. "What happened?" the nurse asked. "Dad was walking home from his shift," Stanley replied. "Late-night witnesses said the driver was drunk. Never got convicted. Claimed he didn't see him. My mom never recovered. I was 8. Sarah's throat went dry. Stanley rubbed the scar on his jaw absently. "I always said if I ever met the man who did it, I wouldn't hesitate." That night, Sarah returned to her hotel room and pulled out the old police report she had kept hidden for years. The file had Henry's name on it, the accident, the blurred details, and the victim's name, Alan J. Brooks. Sarah didn't sleep, not even for a minute. The next morning she walked into the ICU and found Stanley standing by Henry's bed, arms crossed. "You believe in karma?" he asked without looking at her. She said nothing. He pointed at Henry. "That's him. I'd bet my liver on it. His name, his age, the way he limps. Same guy. You're sure?" she asked. He looked at her finally. "What does it matter? He's already halfway to the grave." Sarah hesitated. "He may be eligible for a transplant." Stanley scoffed. "He shouldn't get one. If a liver becomes available, he doesn't deserve to live longer than my dad." Sarah felt something twist in her stomach. The oath she had taken as a doctor clashed violently with the memories rushing through her. The broken glass, her mother's tears, the night she waited by the window for a father who never came. She wanted to scream, to cry, to agree with Stanley. But instead, she said, "Liver transplants aren't about who deserves it. They're about who can survive it, who's compatible," Stanley sneered. "If I find out he's on the list, I'll fight it. Legally, ethically, publicly. I don't care. I'll fight." He walked out, leaving Sarah alone with her father, the machines, and the silence. She sat beside Henry's bed again. His face was pale, his hands cold. The lines on his monitor moved slowly, like a river struggling to flow. She leaned in and whispered, "You don't even know the damage you've done, do you?" His eyelids twitched. She squeezed his hand, gently but firmly. "If I tell them who you are, if I tell him who I am, you might never get that liver. You might die here." He didn't respond. "But if I say nothing," she closed her eyes, "what kind of person does that make me?" Outside the room, Stanley's voice echoed down the hall, arguing with a nurse about visitor hours. Inside, the monitors beeped on. Sarah opened her father's file. The lab results were bad. His liver function was deteriorating fast. His MELD score, used to determine transplant priority, had spiked. If a liver became available within the next 48 hours, Henry might still qualify. She exhaled shakily. I swore to protect life, even when I didn't agree with it, even when it hurts. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out her own ID badge. This time, she laid it on the table where everyone could see it. Dr. Sarah Moore. No more hiding. The call came at 2:18 p.m. A liver had become available. A rare match, compatible with Henry Moore's blood type and MELD score. The team at Memorial General called the ICU, requesting immediate confirmation. They needed the patient prepped, blood cross-matched, transported to the surgical floor within 6 hours. No more. After that, the organ would expire. It had to be now. No delays. No second chances. But Henry Moore wasn't at Memorial General. Somewhere in the maze of overloaded hospital systems and post-COVID staffing shortages, Henry had been transferred, 2 nights ago, to a smaller sister facility 40 miles away. A routine bed shuffling error, a space issue, a form misfiled. The ICU team at Memorial didn't even know he was gone. Sarah was standing outside his empty room, her coffee still warm in her hand, when the nurse informed her. They moved him to Southwood campus, overflow unit. What? Sarah froze. When? Late Monday, just for observation. He was stable, didn't need IQ-level care anymore. Her throat dried instantly. Southwood doesn't have transplant capabilities. They're not even in the organ share system. I know, the nurse said, suddenly nervous. We're trying to get approval to bring him back. No time, Sarah snapped. How long ago was the match confirmed? The nurse checked. 18 minutes. Sarah did the math. They were already bleeding time. She ran. The hallway blurred as she moved, her white coat flapping behind her, badge swinging. She called dispatch, got the usual hold music. Called Southwood, no answer. Called again. Finally, an overworked voice on the other end. Patient Moore? Yeah, he's here. But he's not mobile. No ambulance scheduled yet. I'm his daughter, she said. I'm also a physician. Get him ready. I'm coming to get him myself. She hung up before they could protest. By the time Sarah reached the hospital parking garage, rain had begun to fall, thick, fast, and relentless. The kind that made the city bleed oil and flood intersections. She climbed into her old Ford and floored the gas, tires squealing as she peeled onto the interstate. Wipers struggled to keep pace. Thunder rolled in the distance. Her phone buzzed, messages from Memorial appearing one after the other. ETA on patient. We need vitals before 6 p.m. Clock is ticking. Her hands gripped the wheel tighter. Not today, she whispered. Not like this. At Southwood, the nurse had Henry in a wheelchair by the time she stormed through the entrance. He looked worse, paler, his lips tinged with blue. He wasn't fully conscious. You can't transport him like this without clearance, the nurse said. He needs oxygen. Monitors. He needs a liver, Sarah barked. He has 4 hours. Get me an oxygen tank and a damn portable monitor. It took another 20 minutes to sign release forms. When they finally loaded him into the back seat, propped up with blankets and tubing, she adjusted the oxygen line and pressed 2 fingers to his wrist. Weak, but there. Henry moaned faintly. What's happening? You're going home, she lied. But first, we need to make a stop. His eyes fluttered open just long enough to meet hers. You again. She smiled through the tears forming in her throat. Yeah, me again. They pulled back onto the interstate. The storm was worse now. Sirens wailed in the distance. Cars crawled along, hazard lights blinking. Sarah gritted her teeth and switched lanes repeatedly, weaving between brake lights and puddles. Every few minutes she checked Henry's pulse. At 4:11 p.m. they hit gridlock, flooding on the exit ramp, emergency crews diverting traffic, the main route into the city, gone. No, she whispered. No. She checked GPS. 45 minutes. Too long. She slapped the steering wheel. Think. There was an old service road, half paved, barely legal. It cut through the levee side and came out near the hospital's rear dock. Her father had taken her that way once as a child, pointing out the bayou, telling stories about bootleggers. She turned off without signaling, tires bouncing over potholes and gravel. The rain turned the road into a swamp. Branches scraped the windshield. Mud flew. Henry coughed behind her. She looked back. His lips were turning gray. No, stay with me. He didn't respond. She pulled over hard, threw the car into park, climbed into the back seat, and checked his pulse. Faint. Irregular. Damn it, no. She yanked open her medical bag, found the CPR mask, tilted his head back and began compressions. Come on, Dad. Breathe. Breathe. She hadn't called him that in 20 years. It came out like a broken prayer. 1, 2, 3. Rain pounded the roof like a ticking clock. She gave 2 breaths, then resumed compressions. After 30 seconds, he gasped. It was shallow. But it was breath. Oh my God, she whispered. You stubborn, impossible old man. She kept him upright, adjusted the oxygen flow, and floored the gas again. At 5:37 p.m., they skidded into the hospital's emergency bay. Nurses ran out as she honked and waved. Henry Moore, transplant candidate. He needs to be prepped now. They opened the door. Sarah climbed out, soaked to the bone, shaking. She handed them his paperwork, his ID, everything. Go, she whispered. Get him inside. As they wheeled him away, she leaned against the car, heart pounding, tears mixing with the rain on her cheeks. She looked up at the sky. Just let him make it. Inside, the surgical team began to prep. The liver, still viable, was rushed in. Henry disappeared behind double doors. And for the first time in her adult life, Sarah sat in a hospital waiting room, not as a doctor, but as a daughter. The first thing Henry noticed was the light. Soft, golden, slanting through half-closed blinds. It danced across the pale blue walls and the edge of a chair that looked vaguely familiar. He blinked, slowly, his body heavy and still, like waking up from underwater. There was a low beep near his ear. The scent of antiseptic lingered, but it didn't disturb him. He felt no pain, only weightless stillness. A nurse noticed he was awake and called for the doctor. Moments later, a kind-faced woman in a white coat entered, introduced herself, and asked a series of questions. Do you know where you are? He hesitated. Hospital. Do you know what happened? He paused again. I was sick. The woman nodded. You had a liver transplant. Emergency. You made it through. But you were unconscious for nearly 2 days and your body went through a lot. Henry's brows furrowed. I don't remember much. It's normal, she said gently. You may experience some confusion, some gaps in memory, post-operative encephalopathy. It may pass. He nodded slowly, unsure whether to be comforted or frightened. The nurse left, the doctor left. But not long after, someone else stepped into the room. She didn't wear a white coat this time, just a soft gray sweater and jeans. Her hair was pulled back, her eyes tired but calm. She walked to the window, adjusted the blind slightly, then turned to him. Henry studied her face. There was something in the way she moved, measured, graceful, familiar. You came back, he said, voice hoarse. I did. Have we met before? He asked. She gave the smallest smile. Yes. From here? From the hospital? Sort of. He nodded like that made sense. You were there when it all went wrong. Yes. He watched her carefully. You're not a nurse, no. A doctor? Yes. But, not just that, he added, uncertain but sure all at once. She walked over and sat in the chair beside him. You've been through a lot, she said. Your mind's still catching up. Henry looked down at his hands, veined, bruised, thinner than he remembered. Feels like I left and came back to someone else's life. She hesitated, then said, maybe this part is the new life. He looked up. Do I owe you something? No, she said quickly. You don't owe me anything. He took a breath, then asked the question quietly. Did I hurt you? Her eyes flickered. In a way, she said, but that's not what matters right now. He nodded slowly, accepting what he didn't understand. Over the next few days, Sarah returned often, always without announcement, always at the same time, late afternoon, when the light turned amber and the hospital grew quieter. She brought things to keep his mind active, crossword puzzles, short books, recordings of saxophone music. He didn't ask her name again. She didn't offer it. They spoke of small things, the view from the window, the rhythm of machines, the oddity of hospital food, but never the past, never the obvious. One afternoon, Sarah brought a saxophone case. I borrowed it, she said, from a music therapist. Thought maybe you'd want to try. Henry eyed the case warily, then slowly reached for it. The moment his fingers touched the worn brass, something shifted. Not memory exactly, but instinct, muscle, soul. He lifted the saxophone to his lips and blew a soft note. Then another. He adjusted the mouthpiece, tuned by feel, a few more notes like whispers, then something clearer, a melody, familiar. Sarah's breath caught. It was the lullaby, The same one she'd asked him to play as a child, again and again until sleep took her, the same tune he hadn't played in 20 years. Henry didn't look at her. He just played. Not perfect, not strong, but tender. True. When he finished, he set the saxophone down in his lap. "I don't know why I know that song," he said. Sarah's voice was a whisper. "You used to play it. For someone you loved." Henry looked at her, eyes glistening. "I think maybe I still do." She blinked fast, swallowed hard. "Maybe she still loves you too." He nodded slowly. Outside the window, the sun began to dip behind the clouds, casting the room in soft, forgiving light. The folding chairs in the hospital auditorium were uncomfortable, but no one complained. Patients, caregivers, nurses, and a few family members filled the rows, some in wheelchairs, others with surgical masks or IV poles in tow. The air buzzed with soft chatter and the distant hum of ventilation. A sign taped to the wall read, "Liver Rebuild, Stories of Survival and Hope, sponsored by Memorial General Transplant Unit." Henry sat at the front, dressed in a navy blue button-up shirt that hung loose on his frame. His face had regained some of its color. He'd put on a little weight. He still walked with a cane and got winded too easily, but he was here, alive, present. The microphone in front of him looked too large for the stand, or maybe the stand looked too small for the words he was about to say. A volunteer nurse gave him a nod. He leaned forward and began. "My name's Henry Moore. I'm 62. I had a liver transplant 6 weeks ago. I probably should have had it 6 years ago, but I waited because I was proud, or stubborn, or stupid, maybe all three." The audience chuckled softly. He took a breath. "I used to think I was healthy because I didn't feel sick. That's the trap, right? You think pain is the problem, but sometimes silence is worse. My liver didn't scream. It whispered. For years. And I ignored it." He shifted in his chair. "I told myself I was just bloated, that I was getting older, that my appetite would come back, but what was really happening was that my liver, quietly, patiently, was shutting down." He paused. The room was still. Some of you know what that feels like. Waking up and realizing you can't bend down to tie your shoes. That your pants don't fit anymore. Not because you've gained weight, but because your belly's filled with fluid. That food tastes like metal. That you sleep but never feel rested. Nods moved through the crowd. He glanced at the second row, where a woman in a gray sweater sat quietly, hands clasped. Her eyes didn't leave his. "I'm not here to preach," he continued. "I'm here because I almost died, and because I think maybe someone in this room needs to hear what I didn't." He lifted a small flyer, brightly colored, laminated. The same one Linda had handed him weeks ago. 10 signs of liver trouble. It's all here. Bloating, fatigue, loss of appetite, confusion, yellowing of the skin. I had all of them. But I brushed it off. Didn't go for a checkup. Didn't get my blood work done. Didn't want the bad news. He set the flyer down gently. "I drank too long. I waited too long, and I nearly lost my life. But more than that, I lost years I'll never get back, with people I loved." His voice softened. "I wrote a letter, once, didn't know if it would reach the person it was meant for. I mailed it anyway, and that letter saved me." He looked out across the audience. "If you still have time, call someone who needs to hear your voice. Don't wait for a liver to teach you how to live." Silence, then a smattering of claps, then more. Not thunderous, not dramatic, but real. He stepped away from the microphone and returned to his seat, heart pounding harder than it had since the day of his surgery. The rest of the afternoon passed in stories, some tragic, some triumphant. People spoke of losing loved ones, of guilt, of recovery. A man stood and thanked the family of the anonymous donor who had saved his life. A teenage girl with Wilson's disease talked about going back to school for the first time in 2 years. Henry sat quietly through it all, hands resting on his lap, but his eyes kept drifting to the woman in the second row. She didn't speak, didn't come forward, but when their eyes met, something passed between them, something silent, ancient, unbreakable. After the event, Henry stepped out into the courtyard behind the hospital, saxophone case in hand. The air smelled of wet grass and cafeteria coffee. He sat on a bench beneath a young oak tree and slowly assembled the instrument. His fingers remembered before his mind did. He played softly, no crowd, no applause, just the breeze and the fading sun. A lullaby, low and slow, winding through the branches like smoke. Across the lawn, Sarah watched from behind a hedge of low shrubs. She didn't interrupt, didn't approach. She simply stood there, hands in her coat pockets, listening. He didn't know she was there. Or maybe he did. When he finished the tune, he rested the saxophone on his lap and looked up at the sky. His eyes closed, just for a moment, as if taking in something only he could see. Then, quietly, he whispered to no one, "I hope you remember this part. Some stories end with resolution. Others end with echoes." Henry never got all his memories back, not the way he once had them. Some days were clearer than others. He still forgot names, misplaced keys, lost track of conversations. But the music stayed. The songs lived in his hands, and somehow the lullaby never left. He played in the park every Sunday now. Same bench, same saxophone. People stopped to listen. Not because he played perfectly, but because there was something in the sound, weathered, honest, warm like late afternoon sun. Children danced. Old couples held hands. Strangers smiled without knowing why. And sometimes Sarah stood in the background, not too close, not too far, watching. She never told him, never said, "I'm your daughter," not yet. Instead, she let the silence carry what words couldn't. She brought him soup on cold days, walked with him to appointments, helped him understand his prescriptions. She became what he needed most, a presence, a quiet tether back to a life he thought he'd lost. In time, Henry began to speak to others. At community centers, small clinics, recovery groups, he told his story, not to impress, not to dramatize, but to remind. He'd hold up the flyer, creased and stained now, and say, "If your belly's swollen, if your appetite's gone, if you feel tired all the time, it might not be age. It might be your liver talking, and trust me, you want to listen before it starts yelling." He spoke of the blood test that took 10 minutes, the appointment he waited 5 years to make, the drink he always thought he could control until it controlled him. He spoke of regret, yes, but also redemption, not the dramatic kind, the slow kind, the quiet kind, the kind that starts with asking for help and ends with a note of music someone else remembers. And he always ended his talks the same way: if you still have time, get checked. Make the appointment. Say what needs to be said. Don't wait for a machine to keep you alive to learn what it means to really live. Because the truth is, liver disease doesn't always announce itself. It builds slowly, silently, but early signs are there: bloated belly, leg swelling, fatigue, nausea, unexplained weight changes, and a simple blood test can save years of pain. If you or someone you love has experienced these signs, don't wait. Talk to your doctor. Ask for liver function tests. Make time for yourself, not someday, but now. And if this story reminded you of someone, share it. If it reminded you of yourself, act. You're not too old. It's not too late. And healing doesn't always start with medicine. Sometimes, it starts with a letter. Thank you for listening. If you're a woman listening to this story right now, I want you to pause for just a moment and hear something I learned far too late in life. I used to think the fatigue was just age, that my growing belly was just a few extra meals. I started wearing looser clothes to hide the change. I brushed off the bloating, the yellow tint in my eyes, the swelling in my ankles. I kept telling my daughter, "Mom's just a little tired." But the truth was, my liver was screaming, and I was silent. If I could go back in time, I'd go to the doctor earlier. Just one blood test, one simple ultrasound, one checkup I always delayed, because I was too busy taking care of my husband, my grandchildren, or too afraid of hearing something bad. But the worst news is the one that comes too late. If you're feeling tired all the time, if your belly is swelling and you don't know why, if you've lost your appetite, or your sleep isn't restful, or something in your body just feels off, please trust that feeling. Get it checked. The liver is one of the quietest organs in the body, but when it starts speaking, it's often already in trouble. Don't wait for a hospital bed to realize you could have changed your story. I'm not speaking as a patient, I'm speaking as a mother, one who learned her lesson a little too late and prays you won't have to. Please, get your liver tested. Do it for yourself and for the people who love you